This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 437, entitled The Insufferable Unconscious Arrogance of MFBs, that's Monoconscious Feminazi Bigots. Description. This flyer anticipates a growing number of verbally violent, hateful confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, as the masculists express their impatience and frustration at the level of monoconscious ignorance and unconscious arrogance of the MFBs, when the masculists know that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with their decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism, their many gender crimes against men, their financial crucifixion of fathers in the hated fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, etc. Biconscious masculists will cause many monoconscious feminists to have many a bad day. I find itself. The insufferable unconscious arrogance of MFBs, Monoconscious Feminazi Bigots, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. As a masculist, informed as to how women, that is fluffy women, that is traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, oppress men far worse than vice versa, that is seeing that women's decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism of men is a much greater gender crime against men than men's raping of women, you will obviously be impatient with some feminists sounding off at how men oppress women, when as a masculist you are convinced that women hugely out-oppress men. You will see men's oppression of women as rather small beer in comparison, and see the complaints of the feminists as rather ridiculous in comparison. You will be frustrated at her unconscious arrogance and bigotry, with her thinking that she has every right to sound off at men, since, unless she's old, she has been brainwashed for 60 years that gender oppression is a one-way street, that only women are the victims of gender oppression, and that it is men who are the oppressors, when to the masculist viewpoint it is the reverse that is mostly true. It's not to say that men... That is not to say that men don't oppress women. Typo. If I were a woman, I would hate to be raped. That is, have some much stronger male force me to have sex with him, forced to accept the penetration of his penis into me. That might get me pregnant, and force me to have a child from an inferior male, thus creating an inferior kid that goes so strongly against my female hypergamous instinct. That is, the instinct of women to mate up. That is, the desire to become impregnated by a superior male, so that women have superior children, due to the superior DNA ejaculated into her by her choice of a superior male. Women get hysterical when they are raped, largely because they may be forced to have an inferior kid compared to what they want when they are free to choose their male sexual partner. Men sexually harass women, which pisses women off no end. Mind you, speaking as a masculist, I see male sexual harassment as a consequence of female sexual cowardice. If women took equal sexual initiatives, then there would be as much talk of female sexual harassment of men as vice versa. We would be hearing endless complaints coming from the alpha males, that is, the highly sexually attractive males, to whom nearly any female would love to offer her cunt to, that is, tall, strong, healthy, handsome, wealthy, powerful, humorous, highly intelligent, etc. males, who would be verbally, violently insulting fat 4 females for hitting on these alpha males, rejecting these fat 4s after these inferior women hit on them, with such replies as, quotes, "Nah, you're too fat, too dumb, too low class, too boring. I suggest you try seducing some schmuck at your own level. Lady, you're not in my league, so fuck off. As a masculist, you'll know that when feminists complain endlessly about the need to destroy the patriarchy, that is, general male dominance of the positions of power, that it was largely women who indirectly created the patriarchy in the first place as a consequence of women's hypergamy. Women have always had a monopoly over reproduction, since it is the woman who decides which man gets to ejaculate inside her, getting her pregnant. If some woman does not like some trait in some man, then she simply refuses to mate with that man. So that trait is not passed on to her child, since that man does not get to mate with that woman. If women collectively dislike some trait in men in general, then that trait is removed from the gene pool, since no woman will mate with a man who has that trait. From this, one can conclude that any trait that men have has passed through the female sexual selection filter. Women have always had a monopoly over reproduction, so have been in a position of power in choosing what traits men do have that are in women's self-interest to promote. For example, men's greater height, strength, ferocity, intelligence, etc. In the distant past, women wanted men who could protect them against other men who might kill them or rape them, for example, against other men in the tribe, or especially against male warriors of enemy tribes. Women chose more intelligent males to mate with, because smarter men on the whole made better hunters and thus became better targets for women's sexploitation, trading access to her vagina in exchange for some man's scarce male-hunted meat. Since women have been sexually selecting smarter men for thousands of generations, it's not surprising that men are smarter than women by 4 IQ points on average, according to recent research. Smarter men rise higher in the status hierarchy than dumber men, and for the same reason, smarter men rise higher in today's economic/political hierarchy than women due to men's higher average IQ, higher testosterone levels, which make men more aggressive, ambitious, persistent, dogged, so men finish difficult tasks much more readily than women, so dominate societies. The constant harping of the feminists about the patriarchy merely shows the level of isciency, in brackets, that is, inability to think scientifically due to ignorance of science, of these feminists, most of whom are fluffy crappers, that is, who chose to study fluffy crap majors at high school and college, that is, not the sciences, not math, so often ended up with fluffy crap diplomas that the economy did not value, so earned little money in their 30s when their biological clocks started ticking hard, so they then looked around for some gullible, stupid, man-slavable man to parasite off, to become her manslave, so that she could live in a middle-class house to raise her kids and have him pay for it all. Masculists claim that boys were conditioned into their breadwinner role far more thoroughly and aggressively by their parents than girls were into their child-raising role after the Industrial Revolution caused the creation of the nuclear family, with its greater mobility to chase jobs after the previous company they worked for went bankrupt. A century or more back, women had a dozen kids whom, with rising medical success, were kept alive, making the traditional role of the woman as baby factory and child raiser a full-time job. In the 1960s, men invented the contraceptive pill, allowing women to reliably control the number of kids they wanted, and they wanted only 0, 1 or 2 in most cases. Men gave women science-based medicine, so women's life expectancy rose to 85, so that even if they took 6 years off to raise 2 kids until the second one went off to kindergarten, they still had a career window of, in capital letters, half a century. The masculists then stood up and told women, quote, "Now that you women can work, you must work, since anything else is slavery, manslavery." To masculists, manslavery is slavery, is hated, and hence is a war issue. Masculists are abolitionists. They have a hatred of fluffies, seeing them as immoral, parasitic, man-slaving vermin to be severely punished by being forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. And if the gender laws are not soon men-fared, for example, especially in the divorce courts, which today financially massacre and destroy the lives of a quarter of fathers, and the that's paternity rejection right, is not soon legislated, then men will snap, pick up arms and go on a sex war, assassinating the gender politicians who made these deeply misandrous laws in the first place. Murder thousands of fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, and if the sex war really heats up, we'll go out into the streets and simply shoot MFBs, Monoconscious Feminazi Bigots. Masculists aim to put a masculist group in every high school, every campus, so that young men who have had their masculist consciousness raised are in a position to put enormous moral pressure on their female classmates to fit up, to grow up, by getting a career-competent education so that they can become FIPs, financially independent persons, as adults, and not expect, fluffy style, to parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus man-slaving him for decades, and thus committing a major gender crime against him. That is a far greater gender crime against him than the relatively minor gender crimes that men commit against women, such as rape, sexual harassment, etc. Masculists want the establishment of gender equality committees in parliaments so that gender issues of women and men are addressed equally, so that half of the committee members are feminists and half masculists. Today's so-called gender equality committees are exclusively feminist and not the least bit masculist, which is a major gender political bias and injustice against men, half the world's population. You women, you feminists need to learn that you no longer have a monopoly over gender politics. From now on, you feminists will have to share the gender political stage with the masculists. And since the masculists are men, we masculists will quickly dominate that stage, the way we men dominate everything, since we men are smarter than women, with a higher IQ than women by 4 IQ points. Men have a 10% higher IQ variance than women, so that women's IQ scores are more bunched up over a whole population, whereas men's are more spread out, so that the morons and the genii are males. So since the genii are men, it's not surprising that women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. To top it all off, the most damning fact against women is their 10% smaller brains, which is a lot, like taking an ice cream scoop out of the male brain, so that women have 10 billion fewer neurons in their brains, 10% less neural processing capacity. So it's not surprising that women build nothing, invent nothing, create nothing. There are no female Einsteins, Beethovens, Kants, etc. Men evolve to understand and manipulate the world, since with men's hunting they interacted with it much more than women, who were stuck at home looking after helpless infants. Women, however, evolved to manipulate men, evolving to become prostitutes to men, to be better able to bribe men with sex in exchange for men's scarce male-hunted meat, whom women and their babies so desperately depended on. This is the end of part 1.